One of the most recognizable aspects of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is the overwhelming strength of its protagonist. The demi fiend is easily the most powerful unit in the game, thanks to his fully customizable stat sheet and moveset. So much so that many players have beaten the game entirely with the protagonist alone. This is a pretty impressive feat on its own, but I've never seen anyone try to do the opposite. We all know that the demi-fiend is a nigh-unstoppable force, and it's a reputation that Atlus themselves have acknowledged multiple times. But I've always wondered how well the different demons you can obtain stack up in comparison. Sure, the demi-fiend is cool and all, but the other demons are a lot better than what people give them credit for. So in today's video, we're going to find out if we can beat Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne without the protagonist. Just like always, let's go over our rules first so we're all on the same page. Rule number 1. The demi-fiend cannot perform any actions in battle other than pass his turn. This includes using items and summoning demons. If it takes a press turn icon, then it's banned. However, I'm also going to be banning the use of counter skills. While sure, they are just passive skills and don't always go off, the animation accompanying them straight up plays the standard punch animation, which, to me, invalidates the run. But in the same vein, Magatama changing and other passive skills are totally fair for the sake of keeping him alive. Rule number 2 is that I'm allowed to use save states. Obviously, I won't be using them in the middle of fights, but I'll plop one down at the start of a boss battle to save me having to redo a bunch of content in case I die. Rule number 3 is no new game plus for obvious reasons. Rule number 4 is that I have to get the true demon ending, also for obvious reasons. And finally, rule number 5 is that this run has to be completed on hard mode. As for my version of choice, I'm going to be attempting this run with the North American PlayStation 2 release of this game. This is mostly because of one very specific difference that made me choose it over the Chronicles release, but I'll talk about that much later. I've honestly never played hard mode in Nocturne before, and you know what? I'm actually kind of looking forward to it. I've done a few playthroughs of this game before, and I like to think that I'm pretty good at it at this point. So hard mode would be a good way to spice up this playthrough for me. Oh, hang on, I just gotta do these mandatory encounters first. Shouldn't be so bad. Oh boy, this is gonna be one of those runs, isn't it? We all know Nocturne as an incredibly challenging and rewarding game, but if you're looking for more challenging experiences, then look no further than today's video sponsor, Wanted Dead. Wanted Dead is a true throwback to the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation of gaming, developed by the team behind Ninja Gaiden and published by 110 Industries. You play as Hannah Stone, a police lieutenant working in a special task force looking to get to the bottom of a corporate conspiracy. The gameplay sees you slicing and shooting your way through hordes of unsuspecting bad guys in an 8 to 10 hour single-player campaign. Take down enemies from afar using your customizable firearms, or get up close and personal and cut through them with ease with your katana, or even combine the two to create devastating combos. But just because this is a power fantasy, don't think for a second that this will still be a walk in the park, since this game will kick your ass for playing too recklessly. All of this is wrapped up in a slick aesthetic that takes influence from both 80s cyberpunk and anime. There's even a decent number of fully animated cutscenes featured throughout the story. The game has a somewhat lighthearted tone as shown with the goofy minigames, but the game also knows when to take itself seriously, such as at the bosses that cap off every chapter. And the best part about all of this is that the game is 100% loot box and microtransaction free. Now that you've got the captivating allure of the uniquely stylish Wanted Dead, I've got some great news for you. Act quickly, since Wanted Dead is available at an up to 50% off discount on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. The sale ends on September 4th on Steam, September 5th on Xbox, and September 13th on PlayStation. So don't miss out on this great deal, and get to using my code in the description or pinned comment. And thank you to 110 Industries for sponsoring today's video. The start of the run plays out as normal. After picking the game's difficulty, we're thrust into Doctor's extremely short opening. We name the characters, go to the hospital, experience the end of the world, get some bugs shoved in our face, and before we know it, we wake up in the hospital's basement with these brand new demon powers. However, it's worth noting that before we get our first demon, there are 3 mandatory encounters that act as the game's tutorial. Since there's no way to skip these battles, we're just gonna pretend that these fights didn't happen. Funnily enough, I also suffer from both my first and second death in these opening fights, and let me just tell you that this is a sign for things to come. It's honestly shocking how heavily stacked these 3 battles are against the player in hard mode. I swear, the enemies just land more critical hits here than usual, which means a lot more here in mainline SMT than it does in something like Persona. But eventually, I get lucky enough to barely scrape by these opening fights, and our reward is our first level up. Since I won't be dealing damage with the demi-fiend this playthrough, I'm going to be dumping most of my stat points into vitality. However, I'm also going to need to remember to place a few points in strength for the sake of getting some extra rewards later on. Once I've finished the tutorial, Pixie joins my team as my first demon, and the run officially begins. Some people might already be wondering how exactly I'm going to be getting new demons in this run. The answer lies in our new fairy companion. Something that people tend to forget about SMT Nocturne is that demons are able to learn conversational skills, so they're able to perform negotiation in battle. Thankfully, Pixie learns one of these skills at level 3, so I make it a priority to grind some experience as soon as I can, and a few battles later, the skill is in our hands. Since we're now able to negotiate with enemies, my main priority is to build up a full team as soon as possible, so we can max out our press turn icons. Throughout my dungeon exploration, I snag myself a Kodama, Will-O-Wisp, Shikigami, and Hua-Po. This should be a good enough variety for now. Something that I've also noticed is that enemies are going first in battle a hell of a lot more than usual. I'm not sure if this is a hard mode thing or I'm just getting unlucky, but regardless, it's a bit of a pain. Enemies can easily take out my entire party if I'm unlucky, and since this is only the first dungeon, there isn't a whole lot I can do about it. It's not like I can even run away from encounters either, since it just straight up doesn't work in hard mode. Oh sure, you can try to use the retreat command, but unless you've got yourself a Trifuri skill, it's a complete waste of time. It didn't even work once. In no time at all, we managed to make our way to the first boss, Fornius. Since this is such an early game fight, it plays out in the same way as it would on a regular playthrough. The only thing to keep in mind is that the bonus turns you get from using electric attacks might go to waste depending on the turn order, but it is still worth going for regardless. Aside from that, this fight is nothing to write home about. After defeating Fornius and snagging the Wadatsumi Magatama, we make our way to Shibuya, and it's here when the random encounters start to show their hard mode isms. There are a few times when I come across a formation that's borderline unwinnable, and if the enemy goes first, which happens a lot, then we just gotta pray they miss some attacks or it's an instant game over. On the bright side, we managed to find one of our classmates Chiaki in the nightclub, and we also have another run-in with Hijiri, who offers to transport us through the Amala network to get to Ginza. But before we accept his proposition, I quickly run to the junk shop and buy the Shiranui Magatama. Magatama is going to be integral to this run, since they allow us to change our elemental resistances on the demi-fiend at any time. While most of the skills we learn are going to be useless, I want to get as many passive skills on demi-fiend as possible to make sure that he stays alive. While there is a second Magatama available for purchase here, I'm unable to afford it because hard mode is stupid. There isn't much else we can do for now other than progress the story. The Amala Network dungeon is a massive spike in difficulty. Not only do enemies here deal a lot of damage, but at this point in the game, we don't exactly have a lot of elemental coverage, so our damage potential is limited. What also sucks is that there's no way to fuse demons while in this place, so we have to go into this dungeon confident in our team. As expected, I get my ass kicked in nearly every fight, turning what is otherwise a short romp through the internet into a nearly hour-and-a-half gauntlet of pain. I considered doing a death count for this run, but if I did that, then this video would be almost as long as my entire Persona retrospective. Anyway, after countless attempts, we eventually make our way to the boss room, and unlike Fornius, the specters aren't a complete joke, but it still isn't that difficult of an encounter. I spend my opening turn setting up my buffs and debuffs. I mainly focus on minimizing damage taken, so I get my recently acquired Zen to throw down one Warcry and have Hua-Po cast Rakukaja a couple times. I even let my High Pixie cast Rakunda twice for some bonus damage. I also made sure to give the Demi-Fiend Null Fire Magatama on the off chance he's targeted with an Agi. I want to be careful with my MP here, since the last thing I want is to go too crazy and not have enough for healing. This strategy proves to be golden, since we end up winning this fight on our first attempt. Before we're able to leave the Amala network, we find ourselves in the Amala Labyrinth, where Lucifer presents us with the challenge of collecting all the menorah for him. Afterwards, we arrive in Ginza, so we continue our hunt for Hikawa. We're eventually pointed into the direction of Ikebukuro, the home of the mantra, and if we want to get there, then we need to take a shortcut through the great underpass of Ginza. I suddenly feel sick to my stomach because I know what's about to come next. Just like my other challenge runs, there isn't much to say about the random encounters. I die a lot, and I occasionally manage to snag a new demon thanks to Pixie. Unless something important happens, I feel as though it's unnecessary to go over random encounters. So going forward, I'm just going to be focusing on the boss fights. it's what you're here to see anyway. It doesn't take us long to reach the terminal at the mannequin's underground city, but before we're allowed to progress, we need to snag ourselves a 1,000 yen bill for the collector mannequin. Since there's a pretty infamous boss coming up, I decided that now is the best time to do some prep work. First things first is that I grind demi fiend up to level 18 and start doing some demon fusion. I fuse a bicorn so we can have an okay demon with Sukukaja. I also end up fusing an Ame no Uzume, who not only comes with Medea, but also has an innate immunity to wind damage. I also make sure to transfer Dark Might, which is one of the best skills in the game and is especially useful in this run. Once I fuse my demons and put a down payment on the Null Wind Magatama, I feel comfortable enough to take on the next boss. But before that, we make a quick pit stop to Ginza and raid Loki's room for some cash. While we are stopped by a troll on the way out, his weakness to status ailments proves to be his downfall. After bribing the collector mannequin, the gates blocking our progression open up, but without warning, we're blindsided by our first fiend encounter. Meet Matador, the dread of all first-time players, in the fight that I was not looking forward to. On a normal playthrough, Matador isn't so bad once you understand him, but since I've never played hard mode before, I wanted to play it safe. The main gimmick of this fight is to match his buffs with your own. While you can debuff him, it's mostly in vain since he has access to Dacunda, and his unique agility buff always maximizes his stats. My main strategy with this fight is to lead off with Bicorn and Hua-Po casting Sukukaja and Rakukaja respectively. Uzume is mostly going to be here for healing, and will also be my main damage dealer once my buffs are applied. This is where Dark Might comes into play. This skill is honestly pretty overpowered. It makes it so that during a new moon, any basic attack will always result in a critical hit. Not only do you deal almost double the damage, but you also gain an extra turn icon off of it. And I am sure as shit gonna exploit this to make this fight easier. Matador spends most of his turns casting Mazan, which me and Uzume null, making his two press turn icons pointless. What I'm really afraid of are his physical attacks. Matador can have some pretty crazy damage output if you get unlucky, and he has the right skills to capitalize on that high strength stat. His most deadly combo is his focus into Andalusia. This skill can clean house if he uses focus, so you need to make sure that you have full defense buffs and healing. This fight can be pretty intense, but if you did the prep work, then you should be good. While there are some close calls, we end up winning this fight on our second attempt. While I was pretty worried about this fight, it honestly wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. With Matador defeated and his Menorah claimed, there isn't anything stopping us from rushing through the rest of the underpass, and once we climb out of the sewers, we're right outside Ikebukuro. Before entering the Mantra HQ, I decided to take some time to explore the first Kalpa. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Before entering the Amala Labyrinth, I decided to take some time to explore the Mantra HQ. However, not without a little bit of grinding. I go out of my way to fuse some new demons with better resistances and skills. Though at this point, I'm still leaning into the might is right mentality. To be honest, a lot of the early game demons have some straight up dog ass skills, so you're better off just making physical centric demons. Upon entering the Mantra HQ, we come across our good old pal Samu, but the reunion is cut short since we're quickly captured by Thor and his cronies. And the only way to earn our freedom is in the ring. What this essentially means is that we have to do 3 boss fights back to back. The first 2 are a total joke, but the Thor fight is a bit trickier. Thor's physical attacks hit like a truck, and he also has access to Zeodyne. What you should be doing is buffing your defenses and lowering his attack stat, but like a goddamn idiot, my current party lacks those skills. The only thing I can rely on is my Raiju to absorb his electric damage, and my Kokiri Hime's Sukukaja. Though thankfully, I was smart enough to fuse my Oni with both Focus and Bright Might, so I can consistently deal big damage, throw down some Rakundas every once in a while, and this fight went down after a few turns. With our freedom won, we're able to enter the Mantra building whenever we want. But just when we're about to take a step inside, we're jumped by everyone's favorite demon hunter. The first battle with Dante was pretty tough, mostly because of a combination of me lacking defense buffs and his rebellion attack. Honestly, this move is kind of bullshit on hard mode. Not only does it never miss, but it almost always guarantees a critical hit. If Dante decides to use this attack twice in a row, then the game's basically just telling you to eat ass. It's really annoying if he attacks Demi Fiend twice with this move, since there's nothing you can do to save yourself. After a few attempts, I managed to feel out a strategy. Obviously, the first step is to max out my agility buffs as soon as possible. While Rebellion can't miss, Dante's other attacks don't follow the same rule. I'm also going to apply one debuff every turn, so he'll waste one of his turn icons removing it rather than attacking. This way, we'll be able to apply constant damage with our demons without having to worry about healing as much. Though this plan can easily go out the window if he decides to go for Rebellion. About halfway through the fight, Dante will cast Provoke, which is honestly a blessing in disguise. Sure, this lowers your party's defense, but it also raises their attack in return. Once he casts this spell, I need to focus down, otherwise he can potentially kill my party with a bullet time. Though through a combination of focus, bright might, and some luck, we managed to squeeze out a victory on our 5th attempt. After defending ourselves from Dante, we're able to meet Gozu Tenno, the leader of the Mantra, and after joining his gang, he tasks us with invading the Assembly of Nihilo, which we gladly accept because Hikawa just so happens to be involved with them. Before heading off to accomplish our mission, I take some time to explore the Amala Labyrinth. This dungeon is divided up into 5 blocks, and unlocking the True Demon ending requires you to finish this place before entering the final dungeon. Right now, I only have access to the first block, but I may as well get it out of the way while I can. Since I've gained a few levels, the encounters here are much more manageable. There is still some enemies that can mess us up if we aren't careful, but as a whole, the first block isn't too bad. The only issue is my lack of money. Despite Nocturne's hard mode already making enemies more challenging, for some reason, Atlus thought it was necessary to increase the prices of items and healing spots. Not by doubling the prices, oh no, but by tripling them. To put things into perspective, on a normal run, revival beads only cost about 600 Maka, but on hard mode, they cost over 1500 Maka. This same rule applies to every item, and even the healing station. Shit is pricey on hard mode, so even just keeping up demon maintenance will blow a hole in your pocket. For most of this early game portion, I've been completely drained of money, and even have to resort to grinding a few times. Though thankfully, luck will soon be on my side, but I just need to hold out for a little bit longer. Anyways, it doesn't take us too long to finish off the first Kalpa. Now that we've got that out of the way, time to get back to the main story. The Assembly of Nihilo goes about how you expect it to. The enemies are getting stronger, and my ass is getting beaten to the ground. If the enemy goes first, then we may as well pack it up. In terms of level design, this is where the dungeons start to get a bit more complex. We need to collect keys to open up the path to Hikawa, and each key is guarded by a mini-boss. While the random encounters give me a lot of trouble, the same can't be said about the boss fights. These guys are a pushover thanks to buffs, and I didn't even struggle on any of them. With the keys collected, the path to Hikawa is open, but before we can challenge the boss of this dungeon, I decide to go back and fuse some new demons. Since I'm now level 30, I'm able to fuse Matador, making him my first fiend demon. Fiends are some of the best demons in the game, since they don't have any weaknesses and they naturally null instant kill spells and ailments. I'm gonna definitely want to make more of these in the future. With my new team in place, I decide that now is the time to storm Hikawa's base of operations. But before we can learn what happened to our teacher, he tries to have Osei kill us. The Osei boss, while a bit more challenging than the others in this dungeon, still wasn't anything to get too worried about. Since Osei was the first boss in the game to have access to both Dekaja and Dekunda, I decided to play it a bit safe with buffs. I'd cast 1 Warcry, 2 Rakundas, and 2 Sukukajas. This way we'd be able to minimize the damage taken and increase our dodge chance without having his AI use his buff removers. The only thing to watch out for is his focused heat wave, since it has a pretty good crit chance and deals decent damage to my party. This fight falls into a pattern pretty early on of attacking with Matador and Oni, and healing with Kakiri Hime. While there is a close call near the end of the fight, we manage to make a comeback and secure the victory. With the Assembly of Nihilo cleared out, we head back to Ikebukuro and have another run-in with Chiaki. We hear her reason and are instructed to go to Kabukicho prison, but before we head out, I decide to take on the next 2 fiend encounters, those being the fights with Dai Sojo and Hell Biker. Dai Sojo is nothing to write home about. Just make sure your team nulls instant kill magic and has access to Bright Might and you should be good. The Hell Biker fight on the other hand was a bit more annoying. 2 reasons, Hell Spin and Hell Exhaust. Hell Spin is a strong all-hitting physical move, and Hell Exhaust is a force attack that comes with a bonus Dekaja effect. Hell Biker also has access to Dekunda to use on himself, as well as his own version of Beast Eye. Thankfully, I have Bright Might on my side, so I can cheese out some extra actions. The best advice I have for this fight is to play it safe, since at any point, Ghost Rider over here can just go apeshit. We did almost die at the end of this fight, but thankfully, Bright Might carried us to the W. The next dungeon on our list is the Kabukicho prison, and you know what? This place gets such a bad rep for no reason. The gimmick of this dungeon is that you have to use these gateways to flip it upside down to progress. It's honestly one of my favorite ones in the game, since it really requires you to think a few steps ahead and choose your paths accordingly. It can get a bit brain-scratching for sure, but I think that it's a solid puzzle overall. The boss of this dungeon is Mizuchi, and honestly, I got stuck here for a bit. The gimmick of this fight is that it starts off very strong, but as you deal damage, he becomes weaker, signified by his model shrinking. I guess I might have just been underleveled at the time, since almost my entire team was getting wiped out by his opening attacks, and I only had so many guys that could null ice. So I put a pin in this fight for now and decided to tackle the second Kalpa so I can be better prepared. The second Kalpa, as a dungeon, is a tad more challenging than the first, but it's nothing unreasonable. However, something that I make absolutely sure to do is to go into the cursed room early. This area might look a bit intimidating since you take damage with every step and can encounter endgame enemies, but by making it to the end and talking to this Ifrit, you get a crisp 250,000 Maka. With this truckload of money, I won't have to worry as much about affording new Magatama, at least for a little while. But my first investment is purchasing a custom Nue from the Shady Broker. This guy comes with prayer and null ice, making him a pretty good choice for the Mizuchi boss fight back at the prison. While I could finish the second Kalpa now, I'm actually gonna hold off on that for a little while longer since completing it will spawn the riders around the world. I don't think I'm strong enough to take them on just yet, so I'm just gonna hold on that for a bit. Now that we leveled up a bit and got a new healer in our party, I feel confident enough to do a run back. I end up swapping out my null ice Magatama for one that nulls mind. This is because when you're panicked, there's a chance that you'll use your turn dropping money. And on hard mode, it's almost enough money to put a down payment on a Vancouver apartment. And since I've been so starved for money this entire run, I can't afford to let that happen. Thankfully, my Nue can null ice attacks, so we at least have some silver lining here. For most of the fight, Matador and Eligor are the ones dealing damage, though about halfway through the battle, two of my demons are hit with panic. While we don't end up losing money from their wasted turns, they do, however, end up returning to my stock. This means it's all up to Matador to carry the fight. It only takes a few turns for Matador to get killed by an attack, but I end up getting the luckiest string of events. Matador is left with only 8 health left, and instead of going for the kill, Mizuchi wastes a few of its turns casting Mirage a second time and removing debuffs. This buys us just enough time to squeeze out a kill by the skin of our teeth. With the mannequins rescued, we're introduced to Futomimi, who tells us about their sanctuary in Asakusa. Since we don't have anything better to do, we take a shortcut through the subway station to check out this place for ourselves. The underground tunnels aren't very notable, from both a level design and encounter standpoint. While there are some optional boss fights against a few Onis here to get a new Magatama, I decide to hold off on that for now so I can make some progress in the main story. During our journey to Asakusa, I managed to reach a high enough level to fuse Daisojo. This guy is probably the best support demon in the game if I'm being honest. He has some insane resistances, great healing, has the potential for multiple buffs and debuffs, and most importantly, can restore his MP with his exclusive skill. Daisojo is going to be a staple in my party going forward for pretty much the rest of the game. Anyways, it doesn't take us too long to reach Asakusa. We talk to Futomimi, meet Sakahagi, and invest in some new Magatama for the future. I also play through that stupid Puzzle Boy minigame to get the Gaius Magatama. God, what an awful section. It's not enough that this is a massive shift in gameplay, but it's also hard as hell for no reason. Just do yourself a favor and use a guide. You'll be saving yourself a lot of headaches. After clearing the Puzzle Boy game, we have another run-in with Hijiri at the terminal. He tells us about Hikawa's new base of operations, and that our missing teacher might just be there. So with no other leads, we quickly make our way to the obelisk to check the place out. For the most part, this dungeon is pretty easy, though there are a couple of annoyances with it. Mainly these moon phase puzzles here. You have to be standing in front of the correct door at the right time to proceed, and sometimes it's a little finicky to figure out. It gets really annoying when they combine this puzzle with a mini-boss, since you need to fight each of the Mori sisters in one swoop. The boss of this dungeon is also pretty simple, since it just takes the previous 3 fights and combines them into one entity. Since the game already taught you what skills the sisters have access to, you just need to prioritize taking them down one at a time. With each sister killed, the boss only gets weaker. The sisters also don't have access to Dakaja or any physical resistance, so just use buffs and swing at them with your strongest demons to win. With the Morai sisters slain, we're able to climb to the top of the obelisk where we find our teacher. Miss Takao tells us about Reason, is possessed by Aradia, and is taken away in a blinding light. We head back to Asakusa and talk to Hijiri, who asks us to go to the Amala network and check on Osamu. This revisit dungeon is pretty free since the demons you encounter aren't scaled to your level. Just make sure you bring a stoma and you should be good. The rematch against the Spectre isn't the same story though. This fight was heavily altered from his previous encounter. Now his gimmick is that he drains the MP of your party and uses that to cast Megiddo. Your main priority should be to buff your entire party. Apply maybe 1 or 2 debuffs to the boss itself. Don't go too crazy, otherwise you run the risk of Dakunda being used. I personally think you should prioritize agility buffs here, since you want to minimize the amount of MP stolen. What better way to do that than not get hit at all? In the case where my MP is taken from me, I just use my next turn to have Daisojo take it back from one of the Spectres. All in all, it's a pretty simple fight, but it does end up taking me a couple of attempts. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, there's nothing stopping us from reaching Osamu, who's looking a little different since the last time we saw him. Anyways, he tells us his reason, then afterwards we head back to Ikebukuro and Hirakawa's reason. Then finally we go back to Futomini, who tells us to head to Yoyogi Park. Yeah, a lot of this game is spent running around where people tell you to. After taking a shortcut through the tunnels, we arrive at Yoyogi Park. We meet Takao at the entrance, and she tasks us with retrieving an item from Sakahagi. Before entering the dungeon, I decide that now's a good time to start constructing a magic-focused team. For most of the game, I've been relying heavily on physical attacks. While they are still the better option most of the time, they're gonna be useless against the upcoming boss. I end up fusing an Okuni Nushi since he learns Agidyne at level 41. I also fuse a Jin who starts with both Zandyne and Force Boost, which is a pretty good combination to have. The Yoyogi Park dungeon honestly gets a really bad rep for basically no reason. The name of the game this time around is Memorization. Your goal is to travel through the correct gates in the dungeon to make progress. If the fairies catch you, then you're sent back to the start of the section. I don't find this to be as annoying as everyone else does. I guess I just have a good knack for this kind of thing. Plus, there are towers that show you the locations of all the fairies in the area, so really, it's on you if you get stuck. While the gimmick is easy to manage, what is annoying are the encounters. Satanta is a bit of an asshole. If he goes first in battle, then it's basically a game over. Critical hit after critical hit led to my downfall on multiple occasions, and dragged out this visit to Yoyogi Park much longer than it should have. After dying like 5 times due to this crap, I eventually make it to the boss room and challenge everyone's favorite elephant, Giri Makala. Anyone who knows anything about this series knows that Giri Makala reflects physical, so make sure you have a magic-centric team going into this fight. Giri Makala can't remove buffs, but he does have access to debuffs and some pretty strong physical moves. The main thing to watch out for is Blight, since not only can it crit, but it can also inflict you with poison. But if you have Daisojo on your team, then it's nothing to worry about. Once you're fully maxed out on buffs, just sling your strongest magic at him until he's dead. I may as well use the time to talk about why I don't bother with magic in this game all that much. I get it, you see the numbers that I'm doing and they look good, so what exactly is wrong with it? It's honestly quite a few things. Magic in SMT Nocturne works off of a really weird damage formula. Basically, all you need to know is that some genius at Atlus wrote the formula in such a way that the higher level you are, the less damage spells do overall. Not only does physical not suffer from this, but physical attacks are the only ones that can be charged up. There's no magic version of focus, meaning that physical just outputs more damage in a lot of cases. Plus, it costs next to no MP to do so. Sure, nothing in the game is weak to physical per se, but Bright Might and Dark Might more than make up for that, and demons are more likely to null magic attacks than physical attacks. Plus, the game low-key encourages a physical build most of the time because of skills like Freykugel and Deathbound. Though don't completely count out magic, since there are a few times after this point where it can be pretty useful. Once you take out Giri Makala, you just have to deal with Sakahagi, though this fight is more so for story than anything. His attacks are very weak, and he doesn't have a whole lot of health. It only takes us a few turns to take him out. Once we retrieve the artifact and deliver it to Miss Takao, she's once again possessed by Aradia, and tells us more about her reason. After that, we go to the Mantra HQ and see Chiaki awaken to her reason's strength. Then Hijiri is kidnapped by Isamu. However, instead of going in to save him, I decide to start doing some cleanup. First things first, I trigger the event that spawns the 4 horsemen around the map, and immediately get to work picking them off. The thing about the rider battles is that all 4 of them are functionally the same, but have a couple of changes to distinguish them. This mainly lies in the element each one specializes in, and whether or not they're able to remove buffs or debuffs. Because of this, going in depth for each individual fight would be a waste of time, so I'll instead just give a general idea and some specifics. Every rider summons 2 allies by their side to assist them in battle. Since every rider naturally has 2 press turn icons, this means that they get a total of 4 actions per turn. You might think that you should target the minions first, but it's actually a trick. Every time you kill one of the rider's minions, they'll cast Dragon Eyes to give themselves even more turns, then they'll just replace the demon you just killed, completely undoing that progress. What you should be doing is hard focusing on the rider themselves, then taking out the minions once you've killed the main boss. They aren't that much of a threat to you, so you shouldn't have trouble killing them. While you are able to score some weakness hits off of the minions, I personally never go for it, since the last thing I want to do is kill one by mistake. The first fiend I go after is the White Rider, and this guy is fucking annoying. Not just because he has access to Prominence, one of the strongest spells in the game, but also because of his unique skill, God's Bow. This move is a guaranteed instant kill on whoever he uses it on. The only way to prevent this is to have light nullification, which only a handful of my demons have. I ideally want him to go for Prominence instead, since it's at least possible for some of my guys to survive it. Plus, it'll occasionally hit my protagonist, who drains fire at this point because of his current Magatama. Buffs are also somewhat out of the question, since White Rider has a nasty habit of spamming Dekaja. While you can debuff the boss's attacks, his minions also like to use Rakunda whenever they can. You really should be bringing Dakunda into this fight with you, since without it, it can be pretty annoying. Honestly, there isn't any other strategy I can think of for this fight other than debuff as much as possible and pray that he doesn't instantly kill my key party members. If someone dies early on, I usually go for a reset. Eventually, I manage to get on a cycle where White Rider uses God's Bow less often, and because of this, we're able to survive just long enough to score a victory. Next up is Red Rider. He's kinda like the reverse of White Rider. Instead of going for debuffs, you should be using buffs, and thankfully, my team is well versed in that. The only thing to be scared of in this fight is Terror Blade. It does pretty decent damage, and has the potential to hit twice, as well as induce panic. His minions also spend most of their turns fully buffing his attack stats, making this a move that you should rightfully be terrified of. My main advice is just max out your buffs, and if you can help it, bring someone with Dekaja. Also, be sure to have someone to drain wind maybe, since White Rider sometimes goes for Wind Cutter instead of Terror Blade. Just like White Rider, a lot of my success in this fight comes down to whether or not the boss uses a specific move. While it does take a couple of attempts, we eventually roll the dice enough times to break even. In contrast, Black Rider was totally free. Despite having a pretty threatening moveset on paper, he wastes most of his turns going for Soul Divide, an attack that Dai Sojo absorbs. This means that we're able to fully debuff him and just go to town with our strongest attacks. A focused critical hit from Sura to Hiko deals over 800 damage. It only takes a few of those for Black Rider to crumble. Sort of weird that this one is just the weakest link, but hey, I'm not complaining. The last horseman we have to deal with is Pale Rider. This can be a bit tricky, not because of Pale Rider himself, rather it's because of his minions. His lows like the spam debilitate to minimize all of your stats, and whenever you try to bring them back up, they just negate that with even more debuffs. What you're supposed to do is match his debuffs with your own, while also packing a Dakunda for your own sake. But since I don't have that skill, I'm gonna have to rely on other avenues instead. My plan was to just buff my agility stat to the max, while also lowering the enemy's attack and defense stats. This way, when I'm hit with the debilitates, I'm at least going to be neutral in agility by the time it's over. From then on, I just gotta pray that we don't get hit by an unlucky critical hit from his blights. This plan, while not foolproof, is good enough for us to earn a victory after a few attempts. Now that we've defeated all of the riders, we have access to the third Kalpa, but I don't want to head in just yet. I quickly backtrack to the Asakusa tunnels so I can fight the Onis. Since I'm so overleveled for this challenge, there really isn't much for me to say. Just make sure it's a full moon when you fight the last one, or else you'll be in for a rough time. I also decided to go back to the prison dungeon and do the optional encounter with Black Frost. This fight is a little tricky since he resists or is immune to most elements. Black Frost has some of the best physical resistance in the game, since he takes next to no damage from those attacks. The only way to consistently deal damage to him is with wind and electric skills, so that's what we're going to be relying on. My primary damage dealers for this fight are going to be Dai Sojo and Jin. I also end up bringing along Titan for this fight, since he can cast double war cries to instantly minimize Black Frost's damage. Once all your buffs are set up, this fight is basically won. Just sling your best magic at him until Black Frost is melted. With all of that out of the way, I decide that now is as good a time as any to head back to the Amala Labyrinth. The third Kalpa is pretty unique since it's not a traditional dungeon. Rather, it's a minigame where you're chased by Dante and you have to flick some switches without him catching you. It's a pretty easy segment, but it's memorable at the least. Just when we think we've outsmarted the Devil Hunter, Dante suddenly appears and challenges us to a fight. The rematch against Dante isn't very challenging. While he does have a few extra moves at his disposal, so do I. With Rakukaja by my side, this fight is so much easier. All you need to do is fully buff your stats and heal when needed. It only takes us a few turns to take him down. With Dante defeated, that marks the end of the third Kalpa, but I end up backtracking up to the switch room. Since I beat Black Frost in a fight, he ends up joining my team. I don't use him much personally, but it's cool that you can get a level 66 demon this early in the game. Now that we've spent an ample amount of time getting distracted, it's time we go save Hijiri. The Amala Temples is an interesting dungeon. This area is divided up into 3 distinct zones, each one hosting its own dungeon gimmick and boss fight. I go for the Black Temple first. The dungeon itself is pretty short and easy, but the boss fight waiting for us at the end here is kind of obnoxious. LCL's signature attack leaves everyone in the party at 1 HP. He then follows it up with a basic attack, killing whoever he targets. There's a 1 in 4 chance that he goes for the demi fiend, and while you think you can just use buffs and debuffs to guarantee a dodge, he can remove them. I threw myself at this fight a couple of times to feel it out and eventually come up with a strategy. Before he uses Black Sun, he spends his turn using mana drain. When he starts to set up, I spend my turn maximizing our agility stat. This way we can potentially dodge his follow-up, but it's not guaranteed. Sure enough, this actually works, and with that, the rest of the fight was on lockdown, and we ended up winning after a few attempts. Next up to bat is the Yellow Temple. This one is probably the easiest out of the 3. It's got a simple gimmick and the boss fight isn't so bad. The main trick with Albion is that you need to kill him and the last of his minions in the same turn. Otherwise they'll revive each other and you'll essentially be restarting the fight. Each of Albion's minions are weak to a specific element, and since they're color-coded, it should be pretty easy to figure out. What I like to do is lower the boss just enough to the point where he's almost dead. Then I set up all my buffs and debuffs and go all in the next turn. It's not a hard fight and we win on our first attempt. The last boss of the Amala Temples is Scotty. Just like Yuri Makala, physical attacks are a no-go, so we have to rely on magic. This in of itself is not a problem. Where we start to run into issues though is with her Earthquake attack. Even if we're fully buffed, this attack deals almost more than our max HP. It also doesn't help that Scotty has buffs of her own. However, we're actually going to use this to our advantage. On the turn before she casts Earthquake, Scotty will always cast Terukaja, so what we're going to do is set up Tetrakarn. While this won't reflect the damage back, it'll at least keep us alive. Once I started doing this, the fight was basically figured out. The only thing I had left to worry about was the cost of Tetrakarn. As long as I don't need to use the move more than 3 times, I should be good. Amateratsu's prominence does a crazy amount of damage with buffs, so I want to have him take advantage of that. Near the end of the fight, Scotty charges up another Earthquake, and while I have just enough MP to use another Tetrakarn, I decide to full send it instead. Turns out that this was the right call, since it only takes 1 more Glacier Blast for Scotty to die. With all 3 temples cleared, the path to Isamu is opened. Once we head inside to confront him, everything hits the fan. Hijiri is sacrificed so that Isamu can gain the power necessary to summon his demonic sponsor. Afterwards, we head back to Asakusa and find out that Chiaki is slaughtering the mannequins. While we do try to oppose her, she retaliates by summoning the 3 Archangels. This is a pretty simple boss. It's a lot like the Morai sister battle when I think about it. Each angel specializes in a specific role, so your goal is to prioritize whatever one you find the most annoying, then work your way from there. Since none of the angels have buff and debuff removers, feel free to max out your stats, then go all out and you should be good. Also, maybe bring some demons along that null expel damage just to be safe. After the battle, we learn that Chiaki has killed Futomimi and summons her demonic sponsor. With nothing else left to do, we decide to head to the Tokyo Diet Building and confront Hikawa, but on our way there, I decide to make some pit stops to kill the remaining 2 fiends. First up is Mother Harlot. This is honestly one of the easier fiend fights in the game. While it's true that she reflects physical attacks, the skills she has access to are nothing to be afraid of. She's got lightning damage, a unique almighty move, and has a multi-hit basic attack. The thing is, she really doesn't do much damage when you're fully buffed. It honestly feels like this is more so a showcase as to what the demon has the potential to do for the player, rather than being a challenging boss in its own right. Just having Daisojo in your party is enough to make this fight a complete cakewalk, and we end up winning on our first attempt. The last fiend on our hit list is Trumpeter. This guy can either be really easy or really hard depending on a few factors. To go over his moves real quick, Trumpeter has access to tier 3 of every standard element, severe almighty damage, and a Kaja to ruin your buffs. Though what this fight really revolves around is his evil melody and holy melody. Every 4 turns, Trumpeter alternates between casting those skills. One of them is a full HP and SP restore, and the other one is a guaranteed instant death spell. Both of these spells target whoever has the lowest maximum HP at the time of casting, so if you're not prepared, then there's a chance that Trumpeter will actually fully restore himself, essentially resetting the fight. I ended up throwing myself at this fight a couple of times to feel out a strategy, and eventually came up with something that worked. What I recommend you do is debuff Trumpeter as much as possible, then buff yourself with 2 Terrakajas. Anything above that has a chance of triggering his Dakaja. Either bring along some demons to nullify his attacks, or make sure the Demi-Fiend has some null passives to minimize the amount of turns he gets. Once everything is set up, that's when you should start attacking. Having a demon with focus and bright might is basic requirement, but make sure that they do not have the lowest maximum HP. That way, when Evil Melody goes off, it won't kill your damage dealer. With this, you should have just enough turns to make it to the end, though I ended up gambling a bit on the last hit. With all of the fiends defeated, we can now fully explore the Amala Labyrinth, which I immediately do after activating the terminal at the Diet Building. The last 2 Kalpas are honestly pretty short and not too challenging. However, I do want to take some time to explore the 4th Kalpa since there are some treasures that I want. Mainly a handful of death stones and a bunch of free money. We can also start the Afterlife quest here if I really want to, but that requires a bunch of backtracking and I just don't have any interest in doing that. Once I've cleared out the treasures that I wanted to, I immediately head to the boss room and face Beelzebub. Fun fact, this is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game, mainly for the music. Beelzebub can be quite the tricky fly. He's packing Dakaja and Dekunda, a unique almighty move, heavy force damage, as well as focus to take advantage of that high strength stat. Though he also has Mazionga for some reason. You'd figure that he'd have Maziodyne instead. When it comes to his resistances, Beelzebub is unmatched. The only standard element he doesn't resist is fire, and while the game wants you to exploit that to win, I'm actually going to rely on physical moves. Even though a critical hit does significantly less damage than fire magic, on the whole, it's still the better option since it gives me more turns to work with. Plus, it works out well in my case since saving MP is a definite must for this fight. The trick with Beelzebub is to not go too overboard with buffs and debuffs. Toss out 2 debilitates and buff yourself by 2 stages. Any more than that will cause him to remove those buffs. While he is scripted to do this anyways about halfway through the fight, we don't want to burn through our MP without any way to reliably get it back, since remember, I can't use items. Once everything is set up, I go through the arduous task of slowly whittling down his health with physical attacks. The fight falls into a pretty simple pattern after this, just attack, heal, reapply buffs when he removes them. Just make sure you build a team that nulls death and you should be good. A few turns later, and Beelzebub gets swatted. With the defeat of Beelzebub, we're rewarded with some decent items and some money. Though to unlock the 5th Kalpa, we have to do some backtracking. We head back to the curse room in the 2nd Kalpa, go to Ginza, then go to Asakusa and get the star key, which we use to open a door in the 3rd Kalpa, that lets us use a switch in the 4th Kalpa, and about 2 goddamn years later, we finally reached the last Kalpa. But hey, we at least get a pretty good reward for all of our efforts, since upon stepping in, Dante offers us a chance to hire him. Pro tip, pick Tails. Trust me. Dante is honestly a great party member for this run. He's got fantastic resistances, good elemental coverage, high stats, and is overall just a good party member. For random encounters, Dante is going to be a mainstay. I also go out of my way to get the Super Pixie. While I don't find it to be a particularly good demon, I can at least have it as a backup. Since we have the Super Pixie in our party, we can get past almost every stat check door, and in no time at all, we make it to the Metatron boss battle. Normally, I don't find this to be a difficult fight, but for some reason or another, Metatron was just kicking my ass this time around. Metatron specializes in light and almighty damage. He has access to Dakaja, Dekunda, some buffs of his own, and a unique multi-hitting almighty move. Just by looking at what he has, Metatron shouldn't be that much more difficult than Beelzebub, and normally, that's the case. But for some reason, his AI was just brutal for me this playthrough. Metatron has a really nasty habit of instantly removing buffs and debuffs even if you only stack 2 levels. Hell, there are times he'll cast Dekunda after 1 debuff. Not gonna lie, this fight took me a good while to strategize for, and I ended up having to make some new demons for it. Black Rider is gonna be a pretty useful demon for this fight. I make sure to give him Glacier Blast, Debilitate, Mana Drain, and Bright Might. That way we can apply debuffs and damage without worrying about MP costs. This fight can be divided up into 2 phases. For the first half of the fight, I made sure to only use 1 buff and 1 debuff every turn. That way, Metatron will use at least one of his press turn icons negating them. He can't use both Dakaja and Dekunda in the same turn, so that way, I'll at the very least be able to keep their benefits for a little bit. Since Metatron has access to buffs of his own, I make sure to use Black Rider to cast Dakaja every so often to bring him back down to neutral. However, it's during the second phase of this fight where things start to get crazy. Metatron is less likely like can remove buffs and debuffs during this stage, but spends most of his time spamming his most powerful moves. Fire of Sanai has a chance of hitting every party member multiple times, and if any of my demons go down from it, then it's basically a game over. I can't afford to have anyone die, since all of my demons are integral for my plan. The best skill to use against Metatron is Glacial Blast, since it has a chance of hitting him multiple times, and deals more damage than physical crits on average. Though it's a good idea to at least fish for those for obvious reasons. Honestly, once you figure it out, this fight isn't so bad, but he can still kill you if you aren't careful. Easily the most challenging boss of the run so far, and we went after about 4 hours of attempts. Now that we've defeated Metatron, there's no more challenges left in the Amala Labyrinth, so we take the elevator down and come face to face with Lucifer. He grants us with a new power and transforms us into a fully fledged demon, and with that, we're locked in. No going back from here. Now that we're done with the Amala Labyrinth, we only have 2 more dungeons left, so let's just finish this off. The diet building isn't that hard. The first boss we go up against is Cert. While he looks a bit scary since he managed to one-shot one of my demons, he's honestly not that hard. Just make sure you debuff him and spam ice skills and you should be good. The next fight on our list is the infamous Mott battle. This fight is much harder than the Cert fight. Mott has some powerful skills, Makakaja, and Beast Eye. You can't rely on physical attacks either, since not only does he resist them, but he also has Retaliate. But Mott does have an electric weakness that you can exploit, so that's what I'm gonna do. I was kinda hoping I would get that glitch where he just spams Beast Eye and kills you, but that never happened to me. My main plan with this fight is to score as many weakness hits as I can, while also using the extra turns to buff up the party. Mott can do some crazy damage with his Megadolions, so having defense buffs is pretty mandatory. However, since Mott always casts Makakaja to raise his magic stat, I decided to do something a bit risky. I used Dante's Provoke to lower his defense, but the trade-off of boosting Mott's damage. I then just go all in on the boss, and we're doing significantly more damage. While this strategy is riskier, I see it more so as a way to beat the boss down before he gets a chance to mess us up. And sure enough, this proves to be the right choice, and we managed to beat him on our 5th attempt. The Mithra fight also isn't anything to write home about. Just buff and debuff, and use Bright Might until you win. The same also applies to Samael, though this fight ends up taking longer since he has Retaliate. Mother Harlot is immune to physical damage, so it's just a safer option to have her attack than anyone else. Daisojo and Black Rider act as my support for this fight. It's not a hard battle, it just takes a little while. After defeating Samael, Hikawa sacrifices Mr. Cow to summon his Reason sponsor. The 3 Reason Bearers all rush off to the obelisk to try to have their ideal world created, and with that, we've just unlocked the final dungeon. Just a couple of bosses left to go. It shouldn't be too bad, right? First up to bat is Ahriman, and man, oh man, this guy is a joke. The fight against Ahriman is divided up into 2 distinct phases. During the first phase, he places restrictions on your actions, and if you go against those bans, then he'll instantly kill whoever broke the rule. But once you reach a certain damage threshold, the gimmick is dropped in favor for a more traditional boss fight. What makes this fight so easy is the fact that buffs and debuffs stick in between phases, and since his first form doesn't have any counters to that, you can probably see where this is going. I spend the opening rounds just maxing out all of my stats and lowering his as much as possible. I also made sure to enter the fight on a full moon so I can get the most out of my Bright Might team. Once everything is in order and we're on the phase where physical attacks are permitted, I go to work just shredding through his health bar. In no time at all, we bring Ahriman to his second phase, but since our buffs are still here, he's in for a world of hurt. Mother Harlot is doing the majority of damage in this fight thanks to her focused auto attack. Her basic attack is kind of overpowered since it hits multiple times, and when all of them crit, it deals a nice chunk of damage. Whenever she isn't attacking, she's casting focus. This fight was an absolute breeze, and Ahriman didn't even land a single hit during the second phase. With Hikawa's silence and his stone obtained, we continue our ascent through the Tower of Kagetsuchi. The next boss fight should be Noah, but we're actually not going to fight him right away. We're just going to ignore him for now, and climb up a little bit higher to unlock the last hub area. There's only a couple of bosses left at this point, so now's a good time to do some prep work for the endgame. Step 1. I grind my protagonist up to level 95. At this level, I can fuse any demon in the game, which means that I can finally make my endgame party. I fuse myself a Beelzebub and Cert to be my physical attackers, as well as a Metatron to act as my support. Since I have Metatron in my party, I go out of my way to backtrack to the 5th Kalpa and buy a custom Giri Makala from the Shady Broker. This little guy is special since he comes with Pierce, an essential skill for this part of the game, and I immediately get to work in diffusing it onto both of my physical attackers. I also go out of my way to optimize a little bit with Matamas for the sake of maxing out some stats. But the thing about all this demon fusion is that it's expensive as hell, which brings us to step 2, grind as much money as humanly possible. Despite me building a pretty decent fortune throughout this playthrough, it isn't nearly enough for all this demon fusion. Grinding money at this point in the game takes such a long time, but there is a trick to get some fast cash. You know those Amala Labyrinth diving minigames? Well, it turns out that the one in the 4th Kalpa has the potential to give out tens of thousands of Maka in just a few minutes with enough skill. This is the best place to grind money at the end of the game, so you bet your ass I mastered this minigame as soon as I could. With a full wallet in my pocket, I make my way back through the Vortex world to pick up any of the stray Magatama I couldn't afford. Now that I have all of them in my collection, Mido gives us the Masakado's Katana, which we then bring to his gravesite to unlock the bonus dungeon. This place can be kinda tough if you don't know what you're doing, but the reward is certainly worth it. The boss fights against the Heavenly Kings aren't too bad, with the exception of the Bishamoten rematch. For some reason, this guy has always been a pain in my ass, and even with all of the prep work I've done so far, he still puts up one hell of a fight. I suggest you bring someone along with Takaja and Takunda to keep his buffs from going out of control. I also recommend you have someone that can repel physical and someone who can repel fire. This way you can minimize the amount of turns he gets. The last thing you want is for him to cast Dragon's Eye and just kill you with some back-to-back Tempests. With all of the Devas defeated, we're able to make our way to Masakado's lair, and after swearing an oath to protect Tokyo, he grants us with the final Magatama. The Masakado's Magatama nulls everything except almighty attacks, and with this, Demi-Fiend becomes a nigh impenetrable wall that can suck the turns from anyone unlucky enough to smack him. After an entire day's worth of prep work, I can now officially say that we're ready to take on the final challenges. And if you think that this was overkill, cute. Trust me, this shit is basically required for the last 2 bosses. But before I talk about them, we've got some unfinished business with our friends. The fight against Noah should be pretty easy, but since we can't use Freykugel, this means we have to actually fight him the legit way. Noah's gimmick is that every turn, he cycles through the elements he resists. So the goal for this fight is to recognize what element he's using and strike him with the opposite. For example, if he casts a fire spell, then you should sling him back with some ice magic. Noah also has a 75% resistance to almighty attacks, so you can't just cheese him with Megadolan spam. This is where Cert comes into play. He's unique in the sense that his physical attack actually counts as fire damage, but scales off of his physical stat. This means that I can get the crazy damage that comes with physical without suffering from Noah's repel. The only drawback is that Cert can only attack once per turn. The only drawback is that Cert only gets 1 turn to attack, and if he goes down, then the fight is basically shot. With this strategy in place, the fight falls into a repetitious bore of slowly whittling down his health bar and healing when needed. And a few turns later, we manage to beat Noah in our first attempt. With Isamu's stone collected, we make our way to Chiaki, but first we run into Thor. With the God of Thunder grounded, we start our final reason fight with Baal Avatar. Since I'm super overleveled for this fight, there isn't a whole lot for me to talk about. Which is a shame too, because Chiaki's boss has some pretty interesting mechanics. It involves you taking down her minions in the proper order before fighting the boss itself. It's a pretty fun fight during a regular playthrough, but crumbles when you're prepared as I am. It doesn't take us long to score the victory on our first attempt. With every reason firmly crushed and all the stones collected, the only thing left standing in our way is Lucifer himself. But before we can challenge him, we need to take care of Kagetsuchi first. I've never done this fight on hard mode before, so this should be a good warm-up. Oh my fucking god. So, I wasn't expecting this to be a roadblock, but here we are. The Kagetsuchi fight on hard mode is ridiculous. This fight is usually a cakewalk, but for this run, it's proving to be one of the most challenging ones in the game, and it's only because of one specific attack. This is a 2-phase boss fight. The first phase is really simple. Just spend your turns buffing all your stats and debuffing all of his. Go all in once you're prepared and it should be over in no time. But once you start phase 2, you better be prepared because now you're on a time limit. Kagetsuchi phase 2 has a unique, undodgeable almighty attack that deals almost above our max HP. This is even the case when fully debuffed. I would like to remind everyone that at this point in the game, we're slightly above level 99, and I have a pretty well optimized team.
The thing that sucks the most about this is that I have to beat this fight without losing a single demon, because if I do, then the next fight after this is going to be impossible. While all of your demons are revived, you still have to resummon that demon from your stock, which I count as a demi-fiend action, so it goes against our rules. There's no demon skills that bring party members back either, like there is in SMT4 and Strange Journey, so if that demon goes out, then they're gone for good. I throw myself at this fight about 10 times before taking a step back and rethinking my strategy. While I do have a pretty good team already, the only thing missing is someone to cast Rakukaja. Some people might think that this addition would be a no-brainer to have, but the issue we face with this is that I need as much firepower as possible for the Lucifer fight, which is why I was so adamant on keeping Cert. But after giving it some thought, I decide that we might be better off with a second support demon instead of 2 attackers. So back to the Cathedral of Shadows I go, and I come out with a shiny new Vishnu, one that has some debuffs, healing, and most importantly, Rakukaja. I also take some time to fuse more Matamas on my main party. Better safe than sorry. Even though I spent a lot of time and money making this cert, I feel as though Beelzebub will be the better demon in the long run for these fights, so I decide to keep the Lord of Flies around instead. With my slightly tweaked party in order, I think we should be good. Alright, let's do the run back. It doesn't take us long to make it to the second phase of this fight, but I made sure to go out of my way to max out our defense buffs with Vishnu beforehand. Even with all the extra defense, Infinite Light still deals about half of our HP. Much better than before, but I'm still gonna keep myself topped up on health just to be safe. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, that wasn't so bad. He was just overreacting. Oh, no. You have not seen anything yet. With Kagetsuchi dead, it's time for the real fight to start. Nocturne's final boss is the King of Hell himself. Lucifer is the most challenging boss fight in the entire game, and is the most difficult boss fight I've done in these challenge runs so far. I thought Izanami was bad, but she's got nothing on Lucifer. Lucifer's got it all. He has access to some of the most powerful skills in the game, buff and debuff removers, and 2 unique almighty skills that can kill you if you're not prepared. High King deals heavy almighty damage to the entire party, and if they don't null status ailments, then they'll be inflicted with stun. His basic attack is non-elemental and has a high chance to crit, which makes it one of his best moves. But the real kicker is Root of Evil. This attack on its own isn't anything to write home about. It can't kill you for starters, but it deals random percentage-based damage to the whole party. But if he follows his attack up with High King, then you're basically dead. In a worst case scenario, Root of Evil will leave you at death's door, and High King will deal the finishing blow. That sounds bad enough already, but that's not even the worst of it. Lucifer has, and I kid you not, a total of 65,535 HP, otherwise known as the maximum amount of HP a character can hold in Nocturne's engine. Man, what the fuck? Combine this with his natural 75% damage reduction, and you're in for a rough time. You need to have Pierce for this boss fight. Otherwise, this battle is impossible to do on this run. This fight is also the sole reason as to why I decided to play the original North American release for this run. Some people might not know this, but the HD version of Nocturne is based off the Chronicles release of the game, and in that version, Lucifer is scripted to fully heal himself about 2/3 into the fight, making his HP go from 65,000 to around 100k. Yeah, I don't want to deal with that, but the idea that a more difficult Lucifer fight exists out there makes me almost have a heart attack. My main strategy for this fight is to try to keep myself fully buffed and Lucifer fully debuffed for as long as possible. Since Beelzebub is the only demon that has Pierce, he's going to be dealing all of the damage. Vishnu and Metatron are going to be solely used for support, unless I can get away with using some auto attacks for some chip damage. This fight is the ultimate test of MP management. Since Lucifer has so much HP and deals quite a bit of damage, you need to know when to properly spend that MP you have. Remember, demons can't use items in this game, so the MP you have going into this fight is the MP you're going to be stuck with. In my opinion, having Lucifer fully debuffed and your defense fully buffed is a must. You don't want to have any demons die during this fight, and if your Pierce user happens to go down, then kiss that attempt goodbye. Secondly, prioritize attack buffs for obvious reasons. Ignore agility buffs if I'm being honest. Most of Lucifer's attacks never miss anyways, so it would be pointless to waste the MP on buffing yourself unless you want a 100% guarantee your attack won't miss. Lucifer is scripted to remove your buffs and debuffs upon reaching certain HP thresholds, and when that happens, reapply them ASAP. If push comes to shove, sacrifice maxing out your attack stat for the sake of squeezing out some emergency healing. The last thing you want is for Lucifer to hit you with Root of Evil, only to be unable to heal. This fight took me hours to feel out a good strategy for, And the best advice that I can give is to have confidence. Be willing to take some risks and leave your party at low HP so you can hold on to as much MP as possible. By doing that and having just a little bit of luck on your side, you'll eventually be able to conquer the impossible. Now that we've proven our power to the Demon of Darkness, Lucifer commands us to lead his army of demons in the final battle against God. With our humanity discarded, we march forward with our new brethren to take back this world for ourselves. While the outcome of this fight is left ambiguous, we can at least say that we stuck to our beliefs. And with that, the game ends. We can now officially say that we can beat Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne without the protagonist. This run was something else. Nocturne has a reputation for being a pretty unforgiving game, one that I think has been overblown for the most part, but hard mode doesn't mess around, and I would argue that the quirks that come with this difficulty setting are what makes challenge runs of this game as interesting as they are. Not being able to run away from fights, enemies dealing more damage, and shop prices being triple are already pretty game-changing. Adding a no protagonist rule on top of that blows things out of proportion. If you were to ask me, normal mode is probably still the best way to experience this game, since a lot of its cheap shots are kept to a minimum. So I recommend you attempt this run on that difficulty if you want this challenge to be fun. Hard mode is a little too unreasonable in my opinion. The more interesting boss fights just aren't worth the frustrations that come with the game's regular progression. But hey, if you think you're good at this game and you feel like you have something to prove, then go for it. But don't say I didn't warn you. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my channel supporters whose names are on screen now. It's because of these lovely people that I'm able to make videos at the pace I do currently. These videos take a while to make, so if you're all interested in helping out and donating, you can do so through my Patreon or channel memberships. I have a few things I can offer in return, such as early video access, a special Discord role, and even some behind the scenes content on occasion. Every donation helps, and if the rewards I mentioned sound interesting to you, then you can find out more by following the links in the description. Okay, I know I say that every time, but it seriously helps out. I've always been really into the idea of recording games off of real hardware for the sake of authenticity, right? Recently, I was able to get the equipment necessary to record high quality footage off of my PS2, and it was a fairly expensive investment. I ended up having to get a completely new capture card just for that, since the one I currently have doesn't support 480i content, which is the most common resolution at the time. But it's thanks to my very generous channel supporters that I was able to afford that kind of stuff. I get that I could just use emulators, but that doesn't really sit right with me. I always liked representing the games how they were meant to be played, on real hardware without any hacks or enhancements. Don't ask me why, it's just the way that I've always been. I've already been putting this new equipment to good use too. I literally just finished recording a full playthrough of Final Fantasy X, as well as gathering footage for a project that I'll keep in the dark for a little while longer. In terms of what's coming right now, the next video is going to be on the highly requested Devil Survivor. That's right, I'm finally getting to it. I've already written the script for that video, so you can expect that to be out sometime in September. If you want to stay up to date with that and other upcoming videos, please consider following my Twitter or joining my Discord server. Both will be linked in the description. Oh yeah, and also if you're interested in more Nocturne content, please consider checking out Bubble T's channel. He may or may not have just uploaded at the same time as me and is talking about the hard type mod, you know, something that not many people make videos on, and that's pretty cool to see. Once again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.